Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to the PoeticPaladin.ca gaming channel, your source for gaming news, reviews, and feature pieces from a Canadian perspective. So, today I'm going to be taking another look at the Steam refund system, specifically on some developer complaints and my recommendations for some changes to the system. So, before we get started, though, I want to talk a little bit about just generally the refund system, and I already did that in another video, but just a little bit of a summary. So, first of all, Valve's new Steam refund system is hugely consumer friendly. So I did cover the general policy in a previously uploaded video, which you can click. If you click the annotation on the screen, you could view that. And more importantly, though, for this video, is that some developers have claimed that the introduction of the refund system have drastically hurt their sales. So we're going to go over that. So first of all, there was Quibu, who released Beyond Gravity. It's a $2 game. It has a very positive rating, but it is worth noting that it is a mobile port. Now, before I go any further, mobile port doesn't necessarily mean bad, but first of all, it does mean that there's a lot of bias towards that. Regardless of whether or not mobile port is good, a lot of people will immediately be negatively biased towards any games which are a mobile port. So keep that in mind. That's very important to remember. And I'm not condoning that behavior, but it is something that I see a lot where people are like, oh, this is a mobile game. And mobile game has sort of become a little bit synonymous with a bad game or a pay-to-win game. And that's not necessarily for bad reason, because they've given us, the mobile gaming market's given people a lot of reason to be in opposition to that because it has a lot of bad business practices. But anyway, so I just wanted to cover that a little bit. So, with Quibu and Beyond Gravity, the thing that they found important about this graph, which is on the screen now, obviously, is that they had 18 sales and then had 13 of them refunded over the past 3 days at the time of tweeting. And they claimed that this level of refunds has never happened before. So, first of all, immediate response, regardless of anything else, we're going to assume here for a moment that their data is 100% correct. And this graph is in no way misrepresenting the data. It's just, this is perfect data, is what we're going to assume for this point. Well, the sample size is extremely small. So, if you consider the fact that the game is $2, now, this isn't necessarily what actually happened. I'm going to go into that in a minute. But we're going to assume that this graph is not misrepresenting anything, that this level of refunds has never happened before, and that the game was at normal price when this happened. So, the sample size of 13 refunds from 18 sales is so small it's not even funny. That's not even valid data, because you're looking at data and it's like, when you consider the fact that it's 13 sales that got refunded out of how many games were just sold on Steam over those 3 days, that doesn't illustrate anything with regards to the whole market. That is not useful data. And so that is the primary point of primary importance. And the fact that it's $26 in gross revenue, and gross being before Valve's cut, before taxes, before anything else they have to pay out. $26 in gross revenue they're getting up in arms over. So, like, what? Like, that doesn't... And, okay. So, and then another point that was brought up that was actually confirmed is that the downward trend on the graph, so moving on from assuming this was perfect data, the downward trend on the graph directly coincides with the game coming off a 50% off sale. So, like, basically, it's invalid, is the units sold, that this graph that they have here, which is stupid anyway, because it's not actually indicative of other things, because this graph shows sales, obviously. This graph doesn't include refunds at all, in case that's what you were thinking. So it doesn't show units, and the units don't go down because there were refunds. So this graph literally has nothing to do with refunds. They're just talking sales, and from this graph, they're claiming that people are purchasing their game less because refunds came out, which is absurd. It makes no sense from any standpoint. So, the downward trend in sales was when their game stopped being on 50% off sale. Really now? Wow, that's never happened before. A game got more sales when it was on sale? Huh. And it's like, so they claim, again, the rate of refunds before was minimal. And so here's another point about a giant spike in refunds after the refund system came out. That is not surprising. That's not surprising information that there was a spike in refunds as soon as there was a new refund system. Because when you consider the fact that the old refund system, for the most part, seemed to be based on whether or not the current Valve support rep decided that you got one or not, based on their goodwill, seemingly. And most importantly, the claim was always that you could only get one refund and then no more. Like, you could get one refund, no questions asked, and then after that, never again. So, so it's not surprising that with a new refund system that doesn't punish you for getting refunds, people are taking advantage of refunds. Like, that's not surprising in any way. And there's also more information I've got on that I will share in a minute, because I want to talk about Puppy Games now. Because Puppy Games also released a similar graph for their game on Steam. Now, their graph is missing the y-axis. That is actually not their fault. It's because, as far as I know, again, just saying that 2 times, really want to stress this. As far as I know, the Steam, when you get onto Steam, there's an NDA that says you can't share sales data with the y-axis there. So you can show this graph, but you can't show the y-axis. Now, I don't want to get into the specifics of that, but so this is the graph that you're actually allowed to show, to the best of my knowledge. But so their graph also shows a significant decrease in sales when Steam Refunds was announced, or around that time. However, it's worth noting, first of all, that the graph was already showing a decline before Steam Refunds were announced. So it was already in decline. Number 2, their sample size, I'm going to have to assume, was extremely small, because it was only a few days after it was announced that they released this graph. So unless they're getting like hundreds of thousands of sales, I don't see what this actually illustrates, other than the fact that out of like 50 sales, maybe some were refunded. And then another thing is just the fact that we're missing the y-axis means that we don't actually have any direct data at all as to what that means. It's just a graph. Like, for all we know, the highest point on the graph is like 10 sales, and it's like it could be exactly like the Quibu one. So yeah, so that's not really overall. I think those 2 things are creating a big thing out of nothing. So it's not useful at all. You can't judge this. It's still way too early. We need months worth of data before we can, from multiple sources, not just 1 or 2 developers. We need months worth of refund data from a variety of game developers to draw any useful conclusions. And like, this is the thing that really gets me about this, is this kind of data analysis is the kind of thing that you find in like grade 11 psychology class. So I really just don't understand why they're trying to spin it this way. I have a feeling it's because they want to be perceived as the underdog and they're being abused, but because that's a really good spin to have on your company. Well, no, you're not. Your data doesn't show anything, and the fact that you're releasing this data in an attempt to try and suggest that Steam refunds are hurting your sales or that people are abusing refunds is irresponsible at worst, and I'd say naive at best. Like, at the very best, you're being incredibly naive to think that after a couple of days, you have enough data to say, well, I can completely conclude that Steam refunds have hurt my game sale. Like, that doesn't make... like. So, just no. No on all of that. Now, number 2, another complaint that a lot of people have been putting forward, or a fear, rather, is that people could exploit the system to refund games which are DRM-free, because games on Steam don't necessarily have to take advantage of Steamworks DRM. They can be relatively DRM-free. And so they're saying people could take advantage of these games by downloading them and backing them up and then refunding them and still playing them. Well, the immediate response to that is, why would people do that? So you're saying people could basically avoid the torrenting stage of pirating games that way. That is very true. But like, that doesn't make sense, because it's already more work than torrenting the game. So if you torrent a game, you log on to the Pirate Bay, you find a torrent for the game you want, you start downloading it with the torrent program of your choice, and you are done. To do this, you actually have to put money into Steam and say, I'm buying this game, and then refund it, which your refund request could be denied if it looks suspicious. So there are a bunch of reasons why people wouldn't do that. So I think already that's a little bit silly, especially considering that in order for a game to get mass pirated, it only takes one person to upload it, and then people just start seeding it, and you just can't take it back. So overall, I don't think that's a really valid worry. I mean, yeah, you can do that. You could totally pirate a game that way. But why would you? Like, it doesn't make sense. It's harder than doing it through the Pirate Bay, and it's riskier. Because if you're just doing a bunch of refunds, you're bound to get your refunds looked at, and they're going to be like, huh, you sure have refunded a lot of DRM-free games lately. So they're going to be suspicious of that, and your account could be banned, or, I assume, refunds taken away. So I don't see why people would do that. And another thing I wanted to point out is that GOG.com has a refund policy, which is specifically for games that do not work after support has tried to help you resolve the issue. But all of its titles are DRM free. And people can literally just be like, yeah, the game doesn't work on my system. And I assume as long as you can trick support, they will give you a refund, which no significant issues have occurred as a result of that. And that is relying entirely on consumer goodwill, because you could literally just turn around and install that game on a different computer and have it work, and then you've got your refund and still got the game DRM free. Well, the fact that they haven't had any major problems in the years that they've had that policy available tells me that it's not a significant issue. At least it hasn't been for GOG. So I don't think it's worth worrying about that, about the exploitation in that way. So, yeah. And then, okay, so that's that. It's really just not worth worrying about exploitation like that in that way, because it's just so early and GOG's already done stuff like that and nothing horrible has happened. So I just want to get into a little bit of observations for a moment, and then a little bit of theory based on that. So something I've observed is that people are reporting successful refunds for games they purchased like 6 months ago. And what I will say about this is a lot of people are saying, well, they shouldn't be doing that. And what I will say in response to that is, actually, I disagree. I think it's a completely valid thing. Because, no, you're right, it's not in the refund policy. However, what I would guess, now, I don't have any proof, so keep that in mind, but what I would guess is that Valve was grandfathering in those refund requests because people prior to the new policy didn't really have a realistic option for asking for refunds. So, for the first, maybe even up to a month, I can see them allowing refunds for up to 6 months ago, and then after that, I don't think they'll be doing that anymore, because it makes more sense for them to not do that. Like, I understand why people don't want them to do that. I'm just saying, I think it's worth it for now, because grandfathering in requests when people before couldn't even get a refund, I think that's the right thing to do from a consumer standpoint. So I think that's why they're doing that. And then a couple of people have talked about some other issues, and I've come up with a few recommendations for tweaking for the refund system. So first of all, people have been talking about how games that are under 2 hours could be completed and then refunded for, like, you've got your game experience and then you refund it, and there you go, you've played the game for free. So one thing Total Biscuit suggested is that maybe achievements tie into it somehow. It's worth noting, of course, that developers could abuse that feature as well, but I don't think that's particularly, like, I can't see that being a huge problem, but it's definitely possible. And then what people have said in contrast to that is, well, what about people that quit like 2 minutes before the end of the game? So yeah, it is a bit of a problem. I'm not exactly sure how to deal with that issue, but I can't see, like, so far we haven't seen any evidence that people have been abusing the system. And there are always going to be people that abuse the system. So I think it's not a huge worry, because I don't think the majority of people will be abusing the system. So that's worth talking about, because you're worrying about something, it's like worrying about piracy. Like, there are always going to be people that do that. So instead of worrying about why people do that, maybe I think if you provide a game that's generally good value, your customers are not going to turn around and screw you, because why would they do that? So maybe some sort of slight adjustment to try and prevent people from refunding really, really short titles. But other than that, I think that part's generally fine. One thing that a developer actually brought up that was really smart was, I don't remember who brought it up to begin with, but some people apparently have thought about the idea of refunding a title after idling in them a bunch and getting a bunch of trading cards. So an easy fix for that, I think, would be to adjust the way that trading cards are given out. So only after 2 hours of playtime are trading cards given out. Another option would be to absolutely just flat out deny refunds for anyone who sold trading cards for a game. So, or another option, like yet a third option for that would be to just deduct the revenue that the player got from selling trading cards from their refund amount. And that's something they could totally do considering they just credit your Steam wallet with it by default. So I think they have a few options with regards to that, and it's actually a pretty smart idea because people, again, I'm sure people will do that. So some way of blocking people from selling trading cards for a game and then refunding it, I think that's definitely okay, and it's not consumer friendly in any way because that's just anyone doing that is just exploiting the refund system. So that would be absolutely fine. And then a third recommendation, actually talking, this one comes from Matt Gamble of RPG Tycoon, sorry. But I think it's a great idea and I would support it as well. So what he said is the following. Initially, this data doesn't really show much except the fact that people are almost instantaneously using this refund feature. It's also worth mentioning that 7 of those refunds show no purchase data, which would only mean that these are claims on the game purchased towards the end of May, and the other refunds were interesting. Looking at sales data, it's not unusual for some users to purchase multiple copies of the game, I imagine for gifting to other players. However, one user purchased the game 7 times and then refunded 5 of them. Did they buy 6 copies for friends only to find out 5 of them already had it? This is part of the problem. There's no way of knowing why users have claimed a refund. There's no communication with me as a developer. I have so many questions. Could it be they were having technical issues? Is it something that could have been solved by talking to me? Did they actually mistakenly buy 7 copies of the game? Is that even possible? And that's the end of the quote. So, I think that's definitely a really valid thing, a suggestion, because a little bit of information from the consumer required when they want to file a refund, which doesn't necessarily affect whether they're given the refund or not. I think keeping the refund policy open is the best way to go because consumer goodwill, basically. Like, just by keeping it open as it is now, it's going to have a good amount of consumer goodwill, and I don't think you need to be cracking down on people just refunding it because they don't like it. Because really, that's how you want to make your money, by keeping keeping money from people who didn't like your game at all, like played it for like 20 minutes and were like, wow, I hate this game. Like, you want to keep their money? Really? I don't think you do, because that's blatantly consumer unfriendly. I mean, even if you think console game, you could just go turn around and trade it in and get a lot of your money back, or maybe refund it. I'm not sure what the exact policies are, but you could definitely trade it in and get a good chunk of your money back anyway, even if you beat it. So I don't think keeping people's money when they're dissatisfied with your product is the right way to go. But I do think developers should be offered additional insight as to why customers are refunding a game, which perhaps they could add a drop-down menu with just some canned responses, or perhaps even better than that, or give them a comment box that they're incentivized to fill out in some way. Like maybe, I don't know, refund comes faster if they fill out the box. I'm not sure exactly how to handle it. Heck, don't incentivize it. I just think it'd be a good idea to give people the option of telling the developer why they are getting a refund for their title. Because I think if developers are offered a little bit more information, I think in a lot of cases they want to help you. If you're having a problem with their game, they would love to help you get that sorted because they want you to be happy. Basically, they want to provide you a good value product. So I think people being able to give the dev a bit more info as to why they refunded their title would definitely be great, especially if it were anonymous, and then they can just be like, okay, and you can listen to that feedback or not, but it's there at least. I don't see any harm in putting that in. So those are some recommendations, and yeah, overall I think the refund system is great, but this is just a bit of general coverage of developer complaints, and then a bit of observations, and then some recommendations. So anyway, I hope you guys found this video interesting, and I've been Taylor. I will see you next time.